Dan Sterling, Senior Director of Sales at Optimove. Thanks everybody for coming into this session where we're going to talk about starting with the customer and winning loyalty for life. I'll share a couple things. We're going to go into some actual case studies and use cases. So hopefully give you guys some kind of actionable ideas of how some real customers of ours have adopted this strategy of customer-led marketing, as we call it, and maybe give you guys some takeaways. I will also, when I share the use cases, give you the opportunity to share. If you can think of something similar that you've done within your business. I know a lot of people from many different types of companies here, but would love to hear from the group. Obviously questions too, if you have them, but even comments. So we can definitely keep this as interactive as people like. So really quick, before we get into it though, just to sort of set this idea of customer-led marketing, you think about a brand that maybe you really like to engage with, right? Maybe it's a retailer you buy from, maybe it's an app that you use, and you like the experience, right? And that could be the push messages they send you, it could be emails, it could be offers, and you like that experience. On the flip side, I'm sure everybody's had those examples of kind of personalization gone wrong, or getting too much spam in your inbox or too many push messages, right? It happens. For me, JetBlue, I fly JetBlue a lot. I'm in the loyalty club, and there's pros and cons to every airline, but overall my experience has been pretty good. I have the JetBlue credit card, the whole deal. What's funny to me is, they send me these misguided offers, so as an example, they send me more offers for the credit card I already have, right? They should know that. Why am I in that campaign? Another, and this is the one that really kills me, is they offer me a rental car in New York when I have a trip booked to elsewhere. I live here in New York, right? So they have my customer data. They should know and do know where I live. So to offer me the rental car in the place I live versus the place I'm traveling to, again, I like the brand and that's fine, but especially being in this space, I notice that sort of example of personalization gone wrong. So I'm sure you guys have experienced some of the same things. So that'll be some of the idea here and what we talk about today. Really quick though, what is Optimove? We're essentially, as I said, a customer-led marketing platform, as we call it. And what that means is that we take in customer data from the brands that we work with. We're lucky enough to work with a lot of different brands, large and small, and these are some of the highlights, as you can see. And we bring in historical data on their customers, so things like transactions, loyalty status, whether it's even a churned customer they haven't seen in a while. And then at the same time, we bring in real-time data from their site and app. So we have an SDK that will collect real-time events. And that's a powerful combination because that can help determine the marketing messages that somebody sees, right? If we know what you look like as a customer, we know there's a long time of loyalty and you're high value, you should be getting different messaging than somebody who just showed up a week ago, right? That's the idea. And so we use that to guide, as you can see, multi-channel campaigns and journeys, and even use things like AI. It's a big buzzword, obviously, but if you think of the way marketers traditionally set up journeys where they can choose a lot of the if-then steps, okay, if no transaction, then wait 2 days and send another email. That's fine, and we have the ability to set up sort of what we call rules-based journeys, but we are now getting into a world in which the machine learning and AI can actually help decide those steps automatically. So we can say, hey, we know that a customer looks like this and is taking this type of action. Let's say email's not working. The system can automatically move them into a campaign that would include, say, a mobile push instead of an email. So what that does is takes a lot of that manual decision-making out of the marketer's hands where they're having to decide all those if-then logic steps and lets AI start to take over and do that. What we've seen with our customers is they tend to blend a couple of them. So Staples still has a bunch of sort of traditional journeys or campaigns where they set manual priority and things like that, and that's fine. But we're also working with them to start doing more of these automated state type journeys. So that in a nutshell is what we do, and we measure it all to see how that can actually work better than the traditional type of campaigns and journeys that you see. So these are the kind of things we geek out on. So for today, we're talking about really how do you build customer loyalty? And you'll see that within the presentation, when it comes to companies who are either a mobile-first company where the app is the product, or maybe you're with a company where the company has an app as part of the product and engagement with the customer. And we're going to look at how this can affect loyalty, obviously overall, and that includes the acquisition, the engagement, and then ultimately the retention of those customers. So we'll dive into it here. So first of all, as we think about start with the customer, this mentality, and I talked to you a little bit about the type data that we bring into the platform, it's really also the mentality of the marketers. And the traditional approach is a lot of times like, okay, we have a product. So we're going to build a campaign around that product. We're going to figure out the channels that it goes to. We're going to figure out the right messaging. And then at the end of the day, we'll figure out who's going to get this message, right? Which customer group. Maybe you're doing some segmentation, or maybe it's just like everybody's going to get the same campaign. So what we talk about is not starting there, not starting with the channel, and not starting with the message, but actually starting with the customer, right? And so what that means is leveraging that data first, extracting the insights you can extract, and then feeding that into where the messages will go, what products will be displayed, et cetera. So a different approach than sort of the traditional. So some of the building blocks to that would be the access to data. So first of all, we talk to marketers all the time where the company is set up in a situation where the marketer needs to get an audience segment of customers. They're still going to an IT team that has to SQL query a database, right? And then provide them with that segment, et cetera. So just that access, having technology where the marketer can get it at their fingertips. So part of our platform will what would be considered like a CDP. And there's obviously, we're not the only ones out there doing that, but that's sort of one of the ideas of the CDP, puts more of that data in the marketer's hand and allows you to do segmentation without having to, know and run, say, SQL queries, right? So that's a big part of it, being able to derive the insights from that data and then being able to use that to guide, again, which messages, which channels, who it's going to go to, and measure all along the way. And so these are really sort of the fundamental elements. And as you'll see in a little bit, like we have this in one platform versus a world in which, the customer data lives over here. And then you have maybe even a journey or orchestration tool, and email is a different platform. SMS is a different platform. Your mobile push is a different platform, right? I talk to brands all the time that have some version of that setup. Maybe they have one vendor that can do the email and the SMS, and then mobile push is over here. But it's still very fragmented. So if you want to be able to go from that data and the insights to quickly scale and to build more campaigns and do it more quickly, you need these as your building blocks. So one way that we like to think about too is kind of funny. You think about Henry Ford and when essentially created the first assembly line, right? That created a lot of efficiencies in manufacturing, right? It was revolutionary at the time. But here we are more than 100 years later, and marketing still a lot of times works along this assembly line approach. And it looks something like, okay, you have the idea. Again, you have to go to the IT team and ask for the data. So there's a wait step involved there, right? You then get that data, and maybe other teams are involved in the insights and actually having to deliver what should be done. You're then able to finally craft the message, create those messages, determine the right channels, and again, a lot of times manually orchestrate that, right? Orchestration is choosing the message, the recipient, the channel, and having that done in an elegant fashion. But obviously, if you have your, even different platforms for those different channels, it's difficult to do that more multi-channel orchestration. And then finally, you measure, right? And a lot of times that can even involve third parties. So we have this sort of assembly line of approach that happens. And, in today's marketing world, it doesn't have to be the case. So we really look at it nowadays. You could say the marketer at a push of a button can have those different elements, the building blocks, as we call it, in one platform, right? And reduce the amount of integration dependencies, reduce the amount of departmental dependencies that can happen, right? So that's really the idea, is creating more efficiency in marketing. This is an area with Staples, years back before we started working with them, they had their email team using the support, a lot of external support from a vendor they were working with. They didn't have as much in-house control, et cetera. And over the past several years, we've been able to get them to bring more of that in-house. The team has more control, and they're able to use things like I was saying, the AI-based, automations and that, which allows them to create more campaigns, but that doesn't necessarily just mean blasting the customers, right? It's more campaigns that are out there, but the system can help figure out the eligibility and figure out what is the best offer for you as a customer versus somebody else who might fall into a different segment or have different customer attributes. So This is the kind of stuff that we think about. Now we'll talk about a few different examples here. So hopefully that'll help illustrate some applicable use cases for how we do this. And again, would love any thoughts that you guys have so far, or even things you want to share about what your company might be doing. But the first one we'll talk about is actually a social gaming company. This particular customer of ours had a number of social games in market already, and they were launching a new game. So they're in that process and figuring out what is the launch plan, what is acquisition going to look like, because obviously at that stage, getting new users into that new game is really key. So this part will touch on acquisition. And what they did, we helped them look across their existing user base for the other games and do a lot of segmentation to really figure out what are the different types of users that they even have and what are those attributes. And so in doing that is where we start to extract the insights, right? If we can look across the customer base and say, these are all the different types of users you have, these are the attributes, these are the ones who end up being our best users versus these are the ones who end up playing for a little bit and churning. And in this particular case, as you can see, they have in-app purchases within this game, which is obviously really important. It's a revenue driver for them. And so the insight they were able to figure out was about the time from first registration, right? So they pay the money to acquire, right? Which we know isn't cheap, right? And there's all these myriad sources for user acquisition. They get them in the door, and when somebody registers, if they made that in-app purchase within the very first day, they obviously had a bit higher. It's about 6% higher if they were purchasing within that first day in terms of the total amount they were spending. So that was the insight to be able to figure out. And if you think, well, okay, 6% is not a massive difference versus if they made a purchase within that 1 week from registration. Obviously, they want to really look at that first week window, because most likely, if they have people register and go more than 1 week without a single in-app purchase, probably a pretty risky, like risk of churn type customer. So for this particular one, they were examining, again, that first day versus any other time after that first day. And while 6% may not be a massive difference, if you think of that extrapolated across a ton of different users, it's a big difference in revenue. So that's that first insight of figuring out, okay, this is what exists within our user base. Now, how do we actually take this and create some marketing actions based off of this insight? So this is what this looked like, right? They know now that the first day is a crucial moment, right? They can get that extra money out of an in-app purchase, create more stickiness within that first day. And so they set up a flow that looks something like this, right? If the player registers, makes that purchase, they go automatically into the normal post-purchase journey that they have. Fine. But if they don't, the system is looking and saying, okay, John registered and now 2 hours have passed. They know that that time is critical within that first day. So that's when they go ahead and serve up that first player bonus within those 2 hours. So again, you register and make a purchase immediately. They don't need to bonus you, right? You did the normal flow. You registered for the app, you got into the game, you made an in-app purchase, fantastic. But they know that not every player is going to do that. So wait 2 hours and give them a bonus. Again, wait another 4 hours, and if they still don't see it, they go ahead and actually up that bonus. So those are 2 steps during that 6-hour time period on that first day that help increase the likelihood that they get that first in-app purchase on that first day, knowing that that's higher value. And if they don't, then obviously once they get into day 2 and that, then they can have different steps from there as to how they continue to get that engagement. And eventually, if they seem like it's a risk of churn player, they could do other things. But again, this really targeted that critical kind of first day. So for this particular use case, again, it's that moment of acquisition and that brand new player, user, customer, whatever they are to you. And for this particular social gaming app, their players, that was so critical to be able to incentivize them and get them to make that first purchase. So I'd be curious, again, any questions somebody has, totally happy to entertain those. But if anybody has something similar, if anybody would like to share of something that, when you get that type of acquisition, having the insight to be able to say, here's the action we want at essentially what we would consider the beginning of that customer or that user life cycle. Would love to hear about that. Also, if anybody took that a little further, this one looked at the purchase value at the very beginning, like that first in-app purchase. Some of the work we do also looks at lifetime value, which essentially extends that further out to say, okay, if somebody did something today, are they actually going to be our best customer a year from now? So you had something to say?
Obviously, that one was an example of how it could work. So the 2 hours and 4 hours, that's based off of. Now, there would be a way to find analytics on how many people brought into the 4 hours versus how many people brought into the 2 hours.
Right.
Per se. Versus does that work? Is would it be beneficial to even go further, or maybe it's not beneficial to do it at all?
Right, exactly. So the question was essentially, can you test, is that the right amount of time? And also within that amount of time, like if the 2 hour step versus the 4 hour step, how effective is that particular one? You're totally right. And that's exactly within Optimove, the way we think about it, because we have the marketing functions like send an email, send a push, et cetera. That's like execution, right? Which is important, but like for us, the data and the testing mentality is a really big part of Optimove. It's like helping people use the data better. And so there's obviously all the customer data we ingest at the outset, which we talked about, but then there's what you're talking about, which is the actual testing within it. Like, how do they know whether 2 hours or 4 hours was the right amount of time? All of that can be tested within Optimove. And so we have A, B, or multivariant testing that can go on. We automatically pull out holdout groups. So there's a control group to be able to test against, and we can understand, is this better? And if we didn't see good results at the 2 hour mark, maybe it should be 1, right? Maybe 2 was too long, or maybe it should be 3. And so all of those can be, and I would imagine with this, I didn't work directly with this client, but that's exactly the kind of thing they're going to test to prove that out. Yeah, no, great point. Other questions or any examples of how any of you have done this, maybe in a slightly different way, if you have a different app? Or other questions? No, good. People getting hungry? People didn't have enough coffee? It's okay. It's okay. If there's no questions, we'll move right along. We're good. So now, again, that was the acquisition element. Now we move on to the concept of engagement, right? So we've acquired them, we've gotten them in. How do we use that customer data to our advantage to get maximum engagement, right? You think about monthly active users, or right? A user's no good if they disappear on you the next month, right? Like, how do you keep people engaged? How do you keep them active within your app? And again, use the data to help guide what you do. So this example is from the food delivery space, right? So this is a food delivery app that we work with. And obviously in that space, it's extremely competitive, right? In some markets, it's almost a winner take all type of situation, right? So there's really a lot at stake. There's also a really high customer acquisition cost, or CAC, right? And so, I mean, acquisition is expensive everywhere, but in this space, they have to do a lot to get the people due to the competitiveness of that, and that user acquisition is really high. So again, that means the engagement part is really important to see. How do we get them? How do we get them using our app? And how do we keep them for the long run? So that's really what this study is about. And really interesting, this particular company, we helped them do an analysis of what type of orders were actually occurring within the app, right? And so you have some people who might just have their one go-to, and that what we consider the low variety, meaning let's say you use the food delivery app and you just order from Subway because that's what you like and that's what you order for your lunch, and you put in that, you're doing that same order, low variety, and not shockingly, you get a low order value out of that type of customer. But they clearly saw, to the order of like 9 times higher, that folks that were going across different restaurants and even different cuisines, right, had more of that variety of their usage of the app, right? Because they're obviously looking at this over time. People aren't ordering from multiple restaurants in a day typically, right? So they're looking at users over a certain period of time and calculating out what that is. And the difference is really huge in terms of that future value. So we look a lot at, again, we said that a customer's lifetime value and then predictive future value, which we'll also talk a little bit more about in the next case. But in this one, they're able to figure that out. There's a much higher value in people who are going to order more. At the same time, the churn rate for those low variety ones is much higher. Again, not totally shocking, right? If you were just ordering from Subway for a while on a food delivery app, and then you realize, like, you know what, there's fees to this, and I could just like go to the place, or I could use a different app. There's so many reasons why the user might bounce from that app and might churn, right? Because it's not that sticky, right? At the same time, and the data shows there's like a much, much lower churn rate to the customers that they had that were using it, again, across different restaurants, across different cuisines. So I think this part hopefully makes sense, but having them actually see the correlation between those things, between both the future value and the lower amount of churn, tells them, again, who are their best customers. So then again, next, what do we do about it, right? As marketers, you've got the insight. Now you set up flows that are going to go accordingly, right? And so for this one, this is a little diagram of what that looks like, where they say, all right, we want to look at the people who we know are that lower variety orderer. Maybe they're newer, or maybe they're not even new. Maybe they've been around for a while and just been ordering from, say, Subway. Not to pick on Subway, but, again, treat them differently than the person who you've identified, or I say person, but really it's a segment of customers typically, right? Treat them different than the segment of customers who's doing all the things already that you want them to do, right? And so for those that just had, the one order, they get that higher incentive, the 20%, to order from a new, like a first-time restaurant, right? So that's kind of a unique idea. Like, you ordered once, great. Try a different restaurant, you get this bonus for trying a different one. So they can capture more of those people, take more people out of that low variety state, right? Then as variety goes up, people have more orders and increase their variety. There is still, a difference between what they might offer. So if they're seeing a low amount of restaurant selections or a low amount of cuisine selections, they have specific flows and specific campaigns for customers who look like that are going to give them that bonus, that, discount percentage off to be able to venture out within the app. So they're doing that to increase the variety. And then with their already higher variety ones, they don't have to give the bonus amount, right? This is a big thing. This is another thing we worked a bit with Staples on, is like examining. So obviously they have so many products. There's lots of different coupon availability, but you don't want to over bonus or over coupon people, right? Those are valuable dollars that you're giving away. And so in this particular case, right, again, the people who look like they're doing all the things that you'd want them to do, great, keep ordering. They may provide an incentive or a campaign that might say, hey, try this new place, but they're not necessarily giving away the coupon amount, right? So that is how they did it, and encouraging them to increase variety, again, because of the effects on lifetime value as well as churn. Any questions or thoughts there, or anybody done something sort of similar when you look at maybe product mix or product preference, anything like that? Questions? Making sense? Yes.
It's very interesting how you said that with this you can actually change the behavior of the customers, like you're nudging them to change their behaviors, which is exciting. And we come from a news industry, and what we want is our subscribers to read a variety of content.
Right.
A breadth of it, because a lot of people just come for sports and then they leave us. But we want them to read a variety, and if you read variety, then you can retain them more, which is very tough to do.
Right.
But it's very interesting to see how one can nudge people to. We try in our ways, but it's not easy. So, right. Giving some nice ideas to what we can do in engagement segment.
Yeah, you have a good use case for that, for sure, of trying, and we were talking about that earlier when you stopped by, is like, how do you suggest content, and again, it comes back to, it's like what you were saying about the testing. It then comes down to testing it, because like, do you automatically know that like, is the finance section, right, or is the art section the next best section for somebody who is just the sports guy or girl, right? Is that, and I don't know that, you don't necessarily know that, you might have an idea, but again, that's where the idea here, if you have a platform where you can more easily go from the campaign to have the testing and the analytic results right there to be able to say and prove it out. That's the important part, is like, how do you test it and be able to say, all right, with statistical significance, right? It's not going to be off of one person, right? But what we try to do at Optimove is we move people into a world where they can do deeper segmentation than they're doing, right? If you think of a company that does, say, a batch and blast email, maybe that's what JetBlue's doing to me, right? They're like, everybody gets the credit card offer, or whatever. Like that's just a batch and blast. I just fit within everybody of millions of people who are going to get that. But in a world where we do segmentation and even micro segmentation, you're creating more personalization that way. So maybe you have not only a sports reader, but a specific type that exhibits certain attributes. You take that segment and you're testing things like, again, is art section the next best content or what that is, proving it out. So yeah, really good. Any other thoughts or questions on this particular one? Food delivery, everybody getting good and hungry. Sorry, apologies for the cupcakes. I should have brought cupcakes, I knew it, but anyways. So the final one here, we got, I think about 10 minutes left. So the final one is related to retention, right? So how do we keep these people for the long run, right? It's like the churn users are no good, right? If you're paying all this money to acquire them and you have the leaky bucket syndrome, as we talk about, you're getting them in and they're leaving. And so we think a lot about retention. This particular one's going to look at fintech, and it's actually a company that does like Forex trading. So obviously for the users they have, it's a very active, very robust situation and a lot of money being traded. Before we actually dive into this customer's use case, though, this will add a little bit more color to what we've been talking about as you think about the way Optimove looks at the customer data. So as I mentioned at the beginning, right, we can get in both the historical data as well as real-time data, what's happening now. We unify that around what we call a customer 360, right? Or some people refer to as a single customer view, right? And that's one of the core things of sort of the CDP element of what a lot of CDPs do, right? Is gather that data together and unify it around some sort of a customer ID, right? That might be a device ID, or any other type of ID that you're using as your unique customer identity. What we then do, though, that's special, and this is pretty differentiated with Optimove, we were founded by a data scientist. And so really what we do is we take all this data on your customers and we're fitting them into these various life cycle stages, right? So we're setting it up so that you can understand the buckets that everybody falls into. And the way that it operates, no one can be in more than one life cycle stage at a time. I mean, that makes sense, right? Because if you're just a visitor, then you're obviously not a purchaser already, right? And so each customer falls into a different life cycle stage. And then that obviously changes over time. People move from visitors to registered to first purchase to, loyal and VIP, or maybe eventually churn, right? So we set this up so that you, as the marketer, you have the foundation of this. And then we actually apply a future predictive measure to this. So we use a bunch of data science. We use things like a Markov reward process to understand the propensity or that future predictive value so that we can actually analyze based on what we know about all of the existing customers. We can zone in and understand who out of the new customers, let's say, or the registered customers have the most propensity based on certain attributes to actually become your VIP. So this is really important. This is where predictive is really powerful, right? Because if you were only operating under a model in which, okay, these are the people who are now our VIPs. They've reached the highest level of loyalty. Like, we know they're the best, so now they're going to get the best in terms of what we want to offer them, or we want to treat them a certain way. That's fine. But what if you could actually do it earlier, right? What if you can understand that predictive future value and use that to your advantage? And so back to the, the Forex trading platform, this is what we helped them do. We analyzed it for them. And in this particular case, it's pretty amazing. I mean, obviously, their best customers, which would obviously be a smaller segment, right? They could have thousands of people trading on their platform, and not everybody is going to be their VIP. So we understand it's a smaller segment, but when you look at the difference, right? Their VIPs are extremely valuable to them, like way above and beyond the others. The others have an average of about like $624 versus the VIPs at over $4,000. So it's definitely a really different situation, and they want to be able to get ahead of that and understand, again, who are going to be their next high value or VIP customers, right? And so this is a way to do that, looking at that, segmentation of the new customers they have, the other traders they have, understanding the likelihood, and then figuring out what to do. And what's interesting here is that you might look over here to the high likelihood and say, well, why would we want to give them a low incentive? That actually goes back to the other example of not over couponing people or giving them too much, right? So if you can understand like, hey, this person is on track to do the things we want to do, we actually don't need to give them the highest incentive. We're going to do things for them that are unique and special to that group, to that, again, that future VIP that we're creating, but it doesn't necessarily mean giving them all of the best bonus or best promotion. In fact, a lot of times it's the opposite. The people who are more at risk of churn or, not going to necessarily end up in the highest group, but you still you need a higher incentive to keep them in there versus the ones displaying, like, for instance, in this case, it might be an above average deposit amount within the first week to be able to start trading. They might say, well, if it's that above average deposit amount, that feeds into the model that's looking at the fact that they might become that future value, that over $4,000 customer. So again, if they're giving some kind of an incentive away, they might not want to give the highest one away to somebody who's already shown that they're coming in with a high deposit amount. So again, this, there's different ways to look at it. You could flip that and say, no, these VIP ones, we want to give the best incentive. So there's not one right answer, but again, it's taking the data, understanding what's going on with your different customer segments, and then actually having that change the type flows, the campaigns, and the journeys that you have, and testing all along the way. So that was really the takeaway for these guys. Again, is not only just bringing the data together and setting up the different life cycles that you have, but adding in top that predictive model to be able to understand and get ahead of these things. Any thoughts or questions there on that example? Has anybody done any of this, like future predictive lifetime value? Not yet. Well, hopefully that got the wheels spinning a little bit. We're around all day. We have the booth here with Optimove, so you can come by. We're happy to also set up demos after the fact and talk about it. Even if you guys aren't, with your company at a stage of buying a CDP or a multi-channel marketing hub, we're totally happy to set up even sort of that exploratory, like, tell us about the landscape type call. So you just tell us and we'll respond accordingly, but happy to chat with anybody at the booth. But just in closing, again, we talked about customer-led marketing. We talked about start with the customer as a mentality and a product philosophy for Optimove. And really that's putting that data at the beginning of everything, right? Rather than saying, hey, I'm going to create a campaign around a channel like just SMS or an app, or I'm going to create a campaign around a certain product. Start first with that customer data and let that guide the way into who should get what, and then use technologies that help make that actually efficient, right? And create automation for yourself. And so in doing so, we have seen some fantastic results. This is our one brag slide, sorry, maybe second brag slide. But this is actually research done by Forrester, so not us. Forrester went and interviewed our customers. We have customers in the online, social game and online casino business. We have health apps. We have folks like, as we mentioned, Staples and Papa John's and retailers. So Forrester went to these people, did their interviews, and this is what they come up with, is they are driving through these tactics that we help them get to. They're driving increases over 30% in customer lifetime value. For the amount they spend on Optimove as a solution, they're getting a huge ROI because we're able, again, to test out all the campaigns and journeys that are running through Optimove, again, through test and control, and say, no, we know for sure that these tactics are working. Lean into what's making you money and measure that versus what's not. And then ultimately the efficiency part, which we talked about, right? Rather than the world in which you're going here for data and somewhere else for different channels, and maybe even somewhere else for measurement, consolidating that as much as possible into a single platform or maybe a couple platforms that are connected together creates that efficiency where you can actually run more campaigns and run more journeys without like 10xing the amount of work that you do. So really appreciate you guys listening to this. Hopefully it was insightful for you. Any other questions before we wrap up? Because I think we're at time. Makes sense? Good. Yes, sir?
So you get insights and the actions all the tasks. How, once you've done that test and you have those tasks, how flexible are they? How do you change them if things, if the context changes? Like how do you know that it's still working, 6 months down the road, a year down the road? Is there any like feedback loop there?
Right. So in the nutshell, you're doing this testing, you're seeing what the results are, and then how do you actually affect that change and move things or see if that's still the case later? So really good question. So for one, again, everything, the campaigns and journeys in Optimove are set up as a test. At the same time, we actually have an AI running we call OptiBot. And that will actually look for insights like what you're saying. So for instance, maybe a campaign was doing well a while ago, but over time, the statistical credibility of that campaign working versus say a control group goes down. Our system will actually flag some of that. Another one that's interesting within that is like, let's say you're running a campaign to a certain group and overall statistically that campaign's not successful to say 80% of people. A lot of times a marketer is gonna be like, oh, this isn't good. It's 80%, this campaign isn't working, let's throw it out. Our system will actually isolate the 20% because what it's doing is looking again at those micro segments and saying, yes, overall this campaign's not effective, but for this particular 20% of customers who look like this in this micro segment, it is, and our system will allow you the method to be able to keep those that it's working for in it while moving the rest into obviously something more effective.